Could a summit in Cairo revive the two-state solution? The leaders of Egypt, Palestine, and Jordan meet to talk Arab unity and peace in the Middle East. Might they find a way to get the two-state solution for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict back on the table? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmaker is the tripartite summit in Cairo. Well, it's one of the longest ongoing conflicts in modern history. For decades, no one has been able to negotiate a lasting peace between Israel and the Palestinians. Throughout the years, hostilities have boiled over, resulting in thousands of deaths. At the heart of the dispute are two groups of people who lay claim to the same land. So how can that be resolved? Well, what seemed to the United Nations like the most promising way was to create two independent states. But with decades of Israeli occupation and illegal settlements becoming more permanent fixtures, is the two-state solution even viable anymore? Let's look at how the map has changed over the years. Before 1947, the State of Israel didn't exist. But in November of that year, the United Nations agreed to split Palestine into two. 55% of the land was allocated for a Jewish state, 45% for an Arab state. The Arab world reacted with fury, and a two-year war ensued. But it only led to further disaster for the Palestinians. By the end of the conflict in 1949, Israel had conquered 78% of the territory. Almost 20 years later, in 1967, war broke out again between Israel and its neighbors, and in just 6 days, Israel occupied the last 22% of historic Palestine, expelling 300,000 Palestinians from their homes. Then in 1995, the United States brokered the Oslo Accords. Israel and the Palestine Liberation Organization agreed to split the occupied West Bank into three areas. Area A, under Palestinian control, Area B, under joint Israeli-Palestinian control, and Area C, under full Israeli control. But since then, Israel has been building segregated housing complexes on Palestinian land in the West Bank in violation of international law. So as illegal settlements become a permanent part of the landscape and more elected Israeli leaders advocate against a two-state solution, what hope do the Palestinians have for ever seeing their own independent state? Well, joining me now to discuss that, from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank, is Nour Odeh, a former spokesperson for the Palestinian Authority. Danny Ayalon is in West Jerusalem. He's Israel's former deputy foreign minister. And from London, Sami Hamdi, the editor-in-chief of the International Interest. Thanks all so much for being with me. First, let's establish where you each stand. I mean, there is, unfortunately, an increasing number of voices saying that a two-state solution isn't even possible anymore. Others, though, say if there is a change at the top, both in Israel, Palestine, and arguably the United States as well, it could still happen. Sami Hamdi, is that wishful thinking, in your opinion?
I think it's important to stress that both the Israelis and the Palestinians are not interested in a two-state solution and never have been interested in a two-state solution. For the Israelis, it's always been about establishing a state from the Mediterranean to the Euphrates, while for the Palestinians, it's always been about resisting this occupation and trying to restore land that has been stolen, that the international community is trying to legitimize under what is today known as the State of Israel. The only party that actually wants a two-state solution is the United States, which is seeking to find some sort of settlement that allows for the establishment of the Israelis and allows the Palestinians to swallow the injustice of their land having been taken for them in exchange either for economic packages, as Donald Trump suggested, or indeed by using force and blockading the Gazans until a new generation emerges that forgets why the war started in the first place, and they accept the little plot of land that is blockaded currently by the Israelis. And it's also important to stress that the underlying issue with the two-state solution versus the one-state solution is that the one-state solution presents a lot of issues for both the Israelis and the Palestinians. For the Israelis, if you have a one-state solution, you have to give Palestinians rights. You have to give them the right to vote, the right to participate in political life, right to healthcare, equal rights to the Israeli citizen, which the Israelis are not happy to do so because demographically the Arabs are still the majority. until Israelis or the Jewish population majority, Israel has no interest in giving the Palestinians these rights, and it resists that one-state solution, but also resists the two-state solution insofar it prefers the two-state because it allows it to expand. For the Palestinians, the one-state solution the two-state solution is problematic because it means acknowledging and forever relinquishing right to the land that's been lost.
Fair enough. Let me get straight to Nour then and get an actual Palestinian perspective. I mean, is Sami's analysis fair, in your opinion?
Well, it's a perspective. I respect it. I think the two-state solution, we have to remind the viewers, is the international solution. It provides the minimum justice for Palestinians, and it remains the object of consensus internationally, even though I have to agree that internationally, I don't see much action towards actually materializing this formula. On the ground, you have successive Israeli governments who've made it very clear. I mean, they just need to stand on the hills and shout. That's the only thing remaining, to say that they have no interest in any solution. The entrenchment of the settler colonial project of disenfranchising Palestinians, dispossessing and replacing Palestinians is the more or less the mainstream of Israeli politics right now. It is the government agenda of the current Israeli coalition government. And so realistically, there is no prospect for dialogue at this point, political dialogue about any solution with the Israelis, especially given the fact that the Americans have, for all intents and purposes, abdicated their role and relegated themselves to kind of facilitating small talk and small measures that keep things calm relatively, but not really moving.
Okay, fair enough. But Nour, let me ask you this, though. I mean, just from, if you can speak perhaps to just the average Palestinian, is it in a sense cruel to keep hope alive for a two-state solution? Because there are those who dream of it and hope to see it before, you know, the end of their lifetimes at least, and sometimes their leaders do say that they will keep that hope alive. Is it fair?
Of course it is. The Palestinian people's struggle is one for freedom and for the materialization of their inalienable rights. To give up on those rights is to give up on our national project, and that would be unthinkable. It's not about hope so much as it is about persevering in what you know is rightfully yours, not just by national consensus, but by international law, by international consensus. This is a matter of legal, moral, political imperative. It's not, you know, hope is something Palestinians know very well how to keep. But it's far deeper than that, and despite moments of hopelessness and anger, which abound these days, the march keeps going, and we only have forward to look.
Okay. I mean, Danny, they might keep that hope alive, but you've said before that it would never be possible, at least with this government. But could there be a government in the future in Israel, do you think, that could make an independent Palestinian state viable, even with settlements becoming more and more entrenched?
Well, the short answer, Andrea, is yes. But let me first thank you very much for inviting me. It's always good to be with you. I'm also very much welcome Ms. Odeh from Ramallah and Mr. Hamdi from London. Let me tell you that it's not very common that I agree on many things with a Palestinian on political issues. On many other issues, yes. But I think I found Ms. Odeh's words making much more sense than Mr. Hamdi. I would call Mr. Hamdi to go back and look at the history books, the religion and spiritual spirit of 4,000 years of Jewish civilization in the Holy Land, aka the land of Israel. So with him saying that a one-state solution is the only one, it's not. And I would also call him for the very recent history. Back in 2000, Camp David, Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Barak, offered a two-state solution. At that time, Mr. Arafat bolted, and that did not materialize. Then, 7 years later, almost 7.5 years later, Mr. Olmert, another Israeli prime minister, offered to Mr. Abbas a two-state solution that did not materialize either. So right now we have I would say that in the long run, I do believe that a two-state solution is the only viable solution for justice to all people, for security to all people, and for prosperity for all people. And this can be done when the conditions are set. Unfortunately, the conditions at this point are not set, and it's a little bit premature. It's premature because in Israel there is a very precarious government, which, by the way, I appreciate very much. It's a multiverse of political parties going all the way from, right, deep right to the deep left, including a first time an Arab party, Arab Israeli party, which we also very much appreciate, but they have no consensus on political issues, only on domestic issues. Also, I'm not sure that Abbas and the Palestinian Authority, which don't know what to do with Gaza, there is a big rift between Gaza and Ramallah. So I don't think the conditions are set now.
Understood. I mean, Danny, I'm going to stick with you, but if you can keep it brief, I'd appreciate it. I know this is a diverse but precarious government, as you've just described it, but there is another very serious condition in looking at this two-state solution. It's not just about an independent state. It's about a Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital, and this current Israeli leadership won't even allow the United States to consider opening a consulate in East Jerusalem at this point to even provide services for Palestinians. Quickly, how much does that alone say about how entrenched and undivided Jerusalem is now in the Israeli psyche, no matter who's in power?
Right. Well, we've had this consulate before the Trump's years. I don't think that it would be such a big news if it comes back again. But at this point, politically, when half of the government will not allow it or will just quit the government, so then we will go into another round of elections, which means no political process viable for many, many months. I don't think it's anybody's interest at this point just to do, piecemeal things. Everything, I believe, will be in the right time, all falling into the right places of the puzzle. But just to take care of one thing at this point, it's just not viable politically in Israel, and I don't think it will help anybody.
Okay, very quickly, Nour, do you agree there?
No, not really. I think it's a little bit more complex than that, and we have to, kind of deconstruct some of these arguments. The United States, for far too long, has had a foreign policy that is predicated on making sure that Israel is happy and finding solutions that appease Israel. So you reward the colonizer and the occupier at the extent of the occupied and the colonized, and that policy persists, and that's why it has failed consistently. At this point, I don't see that policy changing, but that doesn't mean that it's the right path. That doesn't mean that the Biden administration throwing carrots and political goodies at the Israeli government is the right way to go. Israel's path downward, in the downward spiral of right-wing politics will not change if Israel continues to face absolutely no consequence for its actions, whether it's colonial settlement expansion or the egregious human rights violations or many, many other policies that help entrench this occupation. The Biden administration, I don't see changing their policy, but again, that doesn't make it the right way to go or the right formula to find a breakthrough.
Okay, fair enough. Sami, I want to come back to you. And, there is a lot more to this summit than let's just talk peace or try to revive the two-state solution. There are at least another half dozen dynamics at play, at least from your perspective. I want you to start with, first of all, what you think Egypt, the host, actually wants out of this, because it says a lot about what this summit could actually achieve.
Andrea, you're at risk of broadcasting a show that has very little resemblance to the realities that are on the ground. And the reason I say that is because when we're talking about consulates, or when we're talking about the relationship between Israel and Palestine, let's be perfectly blunt about what is going on. We have an Israeli regime, an apartheid regime, that is pushing Palestinians, evicting them out of Sheikh Jarrah in Jerusalem in order to demographically change the composition of Jerusalem, whereby a consulate need never ever be imposed in Jerusalem, and so that it can be Israel. And we will see in Silwan, houses are being demolished in order to create theme parks while Palestinians are...
Sami, we have talked about that before, but I think the reason we're moving forward now is because there is some new leadership in power. We're hoping that this summit can mark perhaps a change in the tide. Yeah.
Taking place is a bid to rescue Mahmoud Abbas. In the last war that took place, the 11-day war, we saw that the Israelis stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque. They were evicting people from Sheikh Jarrah, and Mahmoud Abbas did absolutely nothing except launch statements from his office in the presidential palace. When Biden asked the Israelis, what on earth are you doing? They said, stay out of it. We know what we're doing. We're demographically changing this area because Jerusalem belongs to us. We saw that the world was essentially silent, and they said, well, it's an unfortunate set of circumstances, but the Palestinians are also to blame. We saw tear gas being thrown into the Al-Aqsa Mosque. We saw far-right Jewish organizations coming out chanting death to Arabs, and then Hamas afterwards decided to throw rockets, and then the Palestinians, who have not had any recourse to justice for decades, neither from the US nor the International Criminal Court that Trump threatened to sanction, nor Europe, the Palestinians said, at last somebody is doing something, and that is Hamas, which is throwing the rockets. Not that I'm advocating violence, but what I'm saying is Hamas's response put Mahmoud Abbas in a very difficult situation, whereby now the Israelis are worried that what's taking place is that the pliant Mahmoud Abbas, who is the preferable Palestinian leader for the Israelis to deal with, Mahmoud Abbas, who has been on the dissent within the Palestinian Authority, who have blamed him for not being stronger for the Palestinian cause. What we're seeing now is Egypt, Jordan, Biden, and Benny Gantz coming together and saying, guys, we made a mistake in allowing Netanyahu to have his way. We made a mistake in letting Bennett have his way with Gaza. If it continues like this, the Palestinians will vote for Hamas. They will vote for resistance. They will vote for fighting for their land. We need a leader who's going to accept humiliating terms. Sessions. That's what this summit is about. It's about rescuing.
Okay, I need to put that to the only Palestinian on our panel, Nour. I mean, is this summit in part, or in large part, most part, as Sami argues, about trying to rescue Mahmoud Abbas and build some kind of support again for him as Palestinian leader?
Well, Mahmoud Abbas remains the recognized president of the Palestinian polity, and these meetings always take place before the General Assembly of the United Nations. This is a tradition, if you will, a political tradition that the late President Yasser Arafat established and that Mahmoud Abbas carries on. Internationally, of course, there is a lot of interest in supporting the current Palestinian leadership. Admittedly, in order to bolster its popularity, if that is possible. I think what at the Palestinian level needs to be realized and understood and endorsed is the fact that both sides of the Palestinian division equation are in deep crisis. Neither side has enough ground to stand on to kind of lead in the way that is befitting of the Palestinian people. Hamas is in deep crisis. It will not achieve reconstruction. It will not achieve international recognition on its own. And the PA is in crisis. And the only way forward at the Palestinian level is through dialogue. Having said that, this summit is part of the regional effort to kind of put things in order and to maintain a positive dialogue with the Biden administration, which is important for everybody's survival at the political level. We have to remember these are governments that are allied with the United States. They have mutual interest with the United States. And I think to a large extent, you can see the relationship between Jordan and the PA and the United States. This triangle has been put under a lot of pressure because of Israeli actions, pressure that has threatened the stability of the Jordanian government and the Jordanian system of governance. So there are a lot of interests at play here, and a lot of things that are going to be discussed, not just about how to move forward, because I think everybody understands there won't be political negotiations. But there needs to be kind of an engagement with the Americans. How far will that take The president domestically, I think, not very far. But that's another discussion altogether.
Okay. Danny Ayalon, let me try and ask a broader question then, though it might seem a bit unfair asking you to have some kind of proverbial crystal ball here. But if the two-state solution is really no longer completely viable, and the one-state solution would be close to impossible, especially, I know, as you believe, that Israel must be defined as a Jewish state or else it just ceases to exist. I mean, what is the end game really for the peace process? How do Israel and the Palestinians do better than what's there now?
Well, Andrea, unfortunately, I do not see an end game. Quite the contrary. I think that the Biden administration, and specifically Biden himself, after 8 years of running the vice president office in Washington, D.C., being very close to Obama, who tried his very best, to bring the two parties together and bring about a comprehensive peace. That did not work. Biden has been stung. He's not going to, and that's my prediction. He's not going to spend or squander now political capital or American reputation on the Middle East or on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. They have many, many more urgent issues, not just the climate control and not just Afghanistan. It's just China and Russia and NATO and many, many other things. So I think that we are going to continue to manage the conflict, management mode, and not conflict resolution mode.
Okay. Sami, I'll let you say your piece because, we're back to perhaps what this conference then this summit could actually provide for. At the very, very least, maybe one would think it could lay some kind of groundwork for a peace process in the future. Do you not even see that much value in it? Are there too many other dynamics really at play that completely outweigh the Israeli-Palestinian peace process?
It's not just other dynamics. The two-state solution is built on the premise of legitimizing an illegitimate seizure of land that belongs to somebody else. And the reality is that this is the reason why it's so difficult to implement it. You're asking a people who've been turfed from their land that they should give it to somebody else based on a 4,000-year-old claim, when those people with the 4,000-year-old claim had come to the region as refugees and they were taken in and they were living side by side perfectly fine.
Sami, let me just put to you, after this many decades, this is why we negotiate. This is why there's compromise.
I'm an Algerian. My grandfather and my grandfathers fought 132 years for liberation. Palestine has been colonized for 80 years. There's still 50 years to go. The Algerians, they negotiated with the French for a two-state solution. They negotiated with France for a partition. They negotiated with France in order to try to come to some sort of territorial boundary. They even negotiated with France for equal citizenship, for equal rights as France, and to allow France to maintain control over Algeria. But injustice is injustice. The reality at the end of the day is this: the Palestinians are the oppressed people, and it's on the colonizer to turn around and either give the equal rights to the Palestinians and abandon this ethnocentric, racist, xenophobic approach, or essentially to be defeated and to come to the table in the spirit of reconciliation to form one state for Muslims and Jews to live side by side, as they did in Andalusia once upon a time, as they did throughout history, contributing to science and development and freedom and the like. The Israelis are the ones insistent on an ethnocentric state. The Palestinians are insisting on a multipolar, multi-religious, multi-ethnic state. We have to look at the Israel-Palestine for what it is. It's an apartheid colonization. And the reason why it upsets you and upsets many people that we can't find a two-state solution is because we are still looking at it as a conflict, as opposed to the modern age of colonization, similar to what we saw before. And this is why I genuinely believe that the issue is not anti-Israel, anti-Jew, or anti-Semitism or that. The issue is my Jewish cousin. We lived side by side for thousands and thousands of years. Why do you kick me from my home? Why do you turf me from my land? Why do you take from me what belongs to me that I am willing and ready to give to you as my cousin? Why do you insist on using force, making me bleed, my home, raping my women, and essentially smashing my whole identity and blockading me for the sake of some piece of land that I am happy to share with you? That should be delivered to the Israelis. That's why Bennett doesn't want to negotiate, because Bennett believes in this supremacy. And the reality is that for all of the nice talk that we're talking today, this point. Unless we talk about in real terms, there's no solution.
Quickly, I mean, Nour, so the resistance or the hope, as you described it, will have to stay alive, and it might be still decades more before summits like the one we're seeing in Cairo now actually can make any tangible change.
Look, the Palestinian people have been here since time immemorial, and they're not going anywhere. And so if it's about longevity, if it's about perseverance, well, that's what we are proud to teach all over the world. The idea of giving up on the Palestinian people's basic and fundamental right to freedom, to dignity, to independence is delusional. It won't happen. Whether that materializes through negotiations or without negotiations is another story. But at the end of the day, the Palestinian peoples are not going anywhere. We are the only inescapable fact that Israel has to deal with. And deal with us, it must, and it will. But we have to make the conditions ripe.
Okay.
And that will only come with pressure, outside pressure, with sanctions, with accountability for Israeli actions. Otherwise, there is absolutely no reason for this right-wing trend to stop or to be curbed in any way.
Nour Odeh, I will have to give you the final word. We are unfortunately completely out of time. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists so much for joining us. Danny, I'm sorry I couldn't get back to you, but we're out of time. I'd like to thank our viewers for watching as well. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter @_Newsmakers, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. See you next time.